So, Nyawais Gano Nigia so Kristen Kazak, Onondawaga Nia, Agi Sue Gayo. My name is Kristen Kazak. I'm Seneca Hawk Clan from the Allegheny Territory, and I'm also Polish. I'm really excited to be with you guys today. First, I just wanted to express my gratitude for you all joining us for making change in Buffalo. We have some of my absolutely favorite folks in Western New York, in Buffalo, telling their stories of successes. We learn from them how important and motivating it is to work hard at work worth doing. They'll be sharing wins on campaigns that they've worked hard on, including some of the specific strategies that they've used, and perhaps even more importantly, they'll describe some of the work that's still needed for lasting change here in Buffalo. So I did want to share just our speakers really quickly, and I know that they're going to be doing their own introductions. So we have Lugene Flaron, who's the director of the Cornell ILR Buffalo Collab, Justin Booth, who will be joining us, who's the executive director of Go Bike Buffalo, Rawa Gramacian, executive director of Push Buffalo, Sam McGavern, who will be helping facilitate this conversation. He's a senior policy fellow at PPG and co-founder with Lugene. And he's also been a Cornell ILR visiting activist scholar this past year. And I think he featured a lot of these really great folks in his class on campus. India Walton joins us. She's the executive director of the FB Community Land Trust. And Jessica Bauer Walker, who's the executive director of Connect and founder of the Community Health Worker Network. And they'll be sharing a lot of their different campaigns with us today. I just wanted to take a few quick minutes to talk a little bit more about our work before we dive into some of the really good stuff. As some of you may know or may have heard, I work on Buffalo Commons, which is the joint collaboration between Cornell ILR Buffalo Collab and Partnership for the Public Good. The Collab is part of the School of Industrial Labor Relations, and PPG, for those of you who may not know, is a local, as in Western New York, community-based think tank with over 300 organizational partners. We envision this work as a true commons or a shared space where individuals and organizations can collaborate and share ideas for the betterment of our community. So there's a few things that we regularly work on. The first is maintaining a digital library of relevant information. There's over 500 different resources, from research to fact sheets to publicly available photos that are specifically about Buffalo or Western New York. It's available on Cornell's digital library and also on PPG's website. And I'll share some of those links in the chat in a little bit. If you or your organization has resources that you want amplified or shared with a wider audience, we're almost always able to put them in the library and share them within the network. The second thing we work on is a researchers network. So there's over 175 different researchers from the over 21 institutions of higher education we have locally and from Cornell. Again, these are folks who have said that they're really interested in doing Western New York focused research. So we also have a research exchange related to that, where organizations can complete a small form or reach out to us if they have questions. We try to pair these research questions with some of the researchers in order to try to help answer them. So if you or your organization has any research questions or needs, we can help make that happen. On the other hand, if you're a researcher, you don't have to be affiliated with the university. Let us know if you'd like to be part of the network. The third, and I promise I'm almost done, the third thing we work on are these workshops. We typically offer them in person, but unfortunately, or fortunately, because we have a lot more space here in the virtual world, these workshops offer technical assistance, information, or capacity building, and they're free and open to the public. As you see, I'll put a link in the chat for some of our upcoming workshops, but we have a lot of really great speakers, and we try to elevate the voices and the work of people who are doing really amazing things. Just a reminder, at the end of this workshop, we're going to be sending out both a recording of today. So if you want to sit back, relax, you don't have to take too extensive notes. We'll send it to you directly, and we'll be sending a feedback survey, which helps us keep these workshops free and available to everybody. If you have ideas for future workshops or topics, again, feel free to send those along. And finally, just a few quick housekeeping things. Some of you may be familiar with Zoom. So for this meeting, you have the option to mute your audio and not use your video. I love seeing everyone's faces right now, but if you're not comfortable sharing, that's absolutely okay too. There'll be time to ask questions out loud at the end, or throughout our conversation, you can post questions in the chat, which I'll be monitoring. To make sure the chat is working, we just invite you to type your name, your organization if you're affiliated with one, and maybe one or two of the reasons you decided to join us today. You can talk about something you hope to learn or a big question that you're trying to answer. If you're having any connectivity issues, as I sometimes do, you can reduce your bandwidth by temporarily turning off your video or exiting out of any other programs or applications you might be using. For me, it's often Outlook. It takes up a lot of memory. We'll be sharing any links and resources and the recording, again, in the follow-up email after the presentation. So if anything sparks your interest or you think of other resources, we encourage you to share them in the chat as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Sam to get us started.
All right, thank you so much, Kristen. Welcome, everybody. I'm really glad to be with you this morning. I wanted to make just a few remarks and then put our first question to our panelists. It may seem like an odd time to be talking about success. The work that all of our panelists do is about equity, it's about sustainability, and as everyone listening knows, those elements of the public good have been under massive attack in recent years, and in many ways we've been failing in our work. The world is becoming less sustainable and less equitable very rapidly. So it may seem like an odd time to focus on success. But the reason we wanted to do it is in part because of those massive challenges that we're facing right now, and the fact that so many people, I mean, you've seen it just in recent weeks, how many people around the nation, around the region, are activating and are asking, what can I do? How can I be a part of change, of systems change, of making the community better? And so we wanted to turn to some people who have been part of those efforts for years, who have really dedicated their lives, their careers to making change in the community, and learn from them some lessons about what actually works. What are practical tips, what are strategies, what are ways of going about your work that result in meaningful change in a community. I think that all of the topics that we'll be discussing with our panelists are items that have appeared on the Partnership for the Public Good community agenda in one year or another. And that's the method that we use here at PPG to ask our community partners, what are the public policies that need to happen in the next year? And then we all work together on making them happen. So these are issues we're really familiar with at PPG and where we've seen really meaningful change happen. All right, so we're going to start by asking our panelists just to really quickly describe the change that they'll be focusing on today. And then we're going to go through some of the sort of common strategies for doing public policy work, for making systems change. We'll start with how do you understand an issue, learning from the community and experts. And we'll talk about building people power, how you go about building relationships with individuals and organizations. We'll talk about telling your story through the press, through social media, through word of mouth. And we're talking about working directly with government. How do you build relationships with elected officials, other people in government? How do you work with them to make change? And then at the end, we'll ask our panelists to talk a little more about their current priorities and the change they're working on right now. So to start by framing the case studies, the successes that they've had in the past, we'll start with you, India Walton, Executive Director of FB Community Land Trust. You've been active in the Fruit Belt neighborhood in Buffalo. You've helped make a lot of change there, but that's also had ramifications for the whole city. So as the result of the organizing and advocacy that you've been a part of, India, how is the Fruit Belt different today, and what difference does that make for the region as a whole?
Yeah, I think that the Fruit Belt is sort of a microcosm of what is happening or what is going to happen in other neighborhoods in Buffalo. We've often described ourselves as sort of ground zero for the negative impacts of neighborhood change. With the growth of the medical campus, we saw a varying number of issues, from lack of infrastructure to parking challenges to the increase in housing prices, which in a regular neighborhood, an increase in home values is a more than welcome thing. But in neighborhoods like the Fruit Belt, who has been redlined, and folks have not had access to the equity in their homes, it causes specific challenges like increase in taxes, increase in rents. And it also encourages folks who've lived in the neighborhood for a long time to sell and move on to other places and be replaced with folks who are more affluent, which is not an unwelcome thing, but it does change the fabric of the community. I think that the change that we have seen is that neighborhood, though traditionally have been pretty well organized, is better organized, has a lot of political power. And the Fruit Belt is proof positive of what people can do when they are allowed to lead and provided the resources and support that allows them to lead in a way that's meaningful to us.
Yeah, you've had some very concrete victories. You won state legislation and then city legislation to establish permit parking to relieve the terrible parking pressure that residents were feeling. And then you created the land trust that you now run that has already bought vacant lots from the city, is actively developing housing, has won really significant funding to have permanently affordable housing in the Fruit Belt that is community controlled, that the residents themselves, through the land trust, are able to say, here's what should happen or not happen. Really important changes. Jessica Bauer-Walker, Executive Director and founder of Connect. How has the health and wellness of Buffalo Public School students improved as a result of the advocacy that you and others have done?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hi, everybody. So I've been at this work for about 10 years, the school-based work. Thank God my children finished school yesterday for this year, and I've been reflecting on the journey of all that. So 10 years ago, my daughter being in kindergarten, she did not have recess. She had physical education once a week. The schools were full of a lot of processed and unhealthy food, really high rates of teen pregnancy, and not comprehensive sexual education, sexual health education. And really through our efforts, in a whole school, whole community, whole child type of model, we have worked with parents and students to really be the change that they want to see for healthier schools. So we've seen things like school and community gardens and salad bars in the school, healthy vending. We have recess for the kids now. We waged a campaign to get much more physical education back in the schools, and up to 35 more physical education teachers. So it's been really just working through all the issues that we see and making sure that parents and students are centered in that fight, and making our schools a place where we can feel healthy and safe and supported. I see that Kristen has popped up this model here. We have the kid in the center. So our children are always in the center, and we really want to wrap around all these types of supports for our kids to make sure that they have what they need in school and in life.
It's amazing that you have this incredibly holistic model that we're seeing on the screen, but it's amazing to me how much progress you've made kind of in all elements of that model. Physical education, health education, sexual education, and good food. All of those things are a lot better than they used to be. And just to pluck out one thing that you mentioned, getting 44 more physical education teachers hired in the district, that alone was a massive accomplishment. I remember going with you to the school district on a meeting where a very sympathetic administrator who agreed with us said, well, the most you could get would probably be 4 to 8. And that was an ally. And sometimes it's important not to be too realistic and to aim big and make the big change. Rawa Gramacian, Executive Director of Push Buffalo. Rawa, most people in the region are most familiar with Push as a developer of neighborhood-based housing, as a community organizing group. as a group that's really helped transform a neighborhood in the city of Buffalo that's become a model for sustainable development really around the world. But today I want to talk about a state campaign that you were very, very involved with at PUSH that won an amazing victory on climate change legislation in New York State. So I want to ask you, how has New York State's approach to climate justice changed over the last 2 years as a result of the work that PUSH and your allies have been doing?
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you. Thank you, Sam. I think that why New York State has passed the most equitable and ambitious climate bill in the nation, which is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, took us 4 years to win that campaign. But I think what made it different was that, generally how these things work is that a bunch of policymakers put a policy together and then they do the base building. And it's true, much of the bill that did pass, folks were working on it for more than a decade, but it never gained any traction in the assembly or through any of our governors. And so for 4 years prior to the bill's passage, they did something very different. They worked with some climate justice coalitions and did a tour around New York State and did a regional tour and invited people that were working on climate issues or climate justice or equity issues. And New York Renews was born out of that. We're founding members of the steering committee. And what it was is it was policymakers, it was labor organizations, it was faith-based organizations, it was, environmental organizations, but also climate justice organizations. And from the beginning, what we said is that we really wanted to center the most impacted people across the social determinants of health. So the highest incidences of energy burdens, climate pollution happens in frontline communities or communities that are working poor and people of color communities. And we also did something very different, which was we didn't write the policy first while we were building the relationships with each other, trying to understand what was happening regionally and deciding to focus on most impacted people. We wrote the bill together. And so many of the examples of that bill came from a lot of our work here at PUSH in the Green Development Zone. And one of the things that I think is very unique about the bill that passed is 35% of all clean energy funding would be investments in frontline communities. And they can use those investments to do things like build green, affordable housing, build stormwater management, and other kinds of issues that work at the intersections of racial, economic, and environmental injustice. And for many of us in the climate justice movement, we use that term to really highlight that racial and economic inequality is what has brought on the climate crisis, and we must address those issues simultaneously if we actually want to advance any real climate crisis interventions.
Thank you so much, Rawa. Lujine, when you talk to young people about Buffalo and you ask them what their favorite thing is, what makes it a good place, very often they talk about Canalside. And it's hard to imagine that 15 years ago, the plan for Canalside was to put a giant Bass Pro store there to sell guns and fishing rods and make a lot of low-wage jobs and take up some of the most beautiful, valuable land in Buffalo for a big box national chain store. But that was the plan. So my question for you, Lujine, is how is Canalside different than it would have been? But also, what change did that make in economic development throughout the region, not just Canalside?
Well, thank you, Sam, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this interesting conversation about community change, because I think these days are indicating to all of us that that there's a lot of activism, a lot of demand for change, and so looking at what we've been able to accomplish so far, I think is a valuable exchange, and so thank you all for being part of it. Well, Canalside really asked the question, whose waterfront is this? Because it's different now, because the inner harbor of Buffalo was rescued as a public asset, as a public space for waterfront enjoyment for the whole community. So now what is there are concerts, a children's museum, a place of gathering near the water, instead of, as you say, a crony insider development planned behind closed doors or over Florida vacation property backyards that would have put an anchor Bass Pro, a big box retailer, as the main element of canal side. So canal side is a public space now, and though there are still challenges of what is to come there, I think people understand it as a place that is for them, for the whole community. And the way it has, that campaign and that success has influenced economic development in our region is because it brought to the fore and made people understand that a broad-based campaign can assure that public money goes to public value. In fact, there were bumper stickers that said exactly that: public money equal public value. People understand that they can rightfully require that publicly subsidized development have some form of community agreement that really holds up. And so there's a growing understanding, I think, through what was accomplished with the canal side development, that there are terms for the use of taxpayer money that the community has a right to spell out, that the community's interests are in those agreements, including living wages, local quality jobs that are open to local people who don't have jobs, local minority and women business enterprises, affordable housing, environmentally sustainable construction and development. So the Canal Side campaign has given us a wonderful public space, a model for the importance of public space in urban and community life, and also changed the way we think of economic development and how our own money is used to create economic development.
The power of ideas can be so important, and the Canal Side fight was the first time in Buffalo that we really talked a lot about community benefits and community benefit agreements, and this idea that big development wasn't just welcome as big development, but that it had to benefit the community. And in fact, the first time I got a call from residents of the Fruit Belt that helped lead to our involvement there with folks like India was people reading about this community benefit idea and saying, well, what about the Fruit Belt? We're suffering negative consequences from the development of the medical campus, but we're not really getting any benefits. How do we go about winning those? So these issues are very much connected. Well, let's dive in now to some of the strategies that you all and your colleagues have used to win these victories. And let's start with how you gain understanding of an issue. How do you learn about it? How do you help others learn about it? Both in terms of learning from the community, from the people most impacted, and in terms of drawing in expertise, whether that's local or national expertise. And we'll go in the same order. So India, as you began and others began working in the Fruit Belt, organizing people, what were some of the tools that you used that worked to learn about the conditions, people's experiences, best practices, et cetera?
Sure. So one of the things that I'm most proud of is that the Fruit Belt Community Land Trust is us. We are the impacted people. 6 of our 9 board members are folks from the neighborhood. My professional background is not in nonprofit management. I'm a nurse and a person who lived in the neighborhood and cared about what was happening and was just sort of like propelled into this position and learned along the way. I tell folks that we are building the plane as we fly it. But as I said before, I think that the Fruit Belt is a case study of what people can do when they are provided with the resources to accomplish what they want. People's action has a saying, the people know what we need, right? So the folks who are actually the ones who are impacted know what the solutions are and are often better at using resources, right? Like, who is a better budgeter than a single mother, or, you know, the grandma who's been taking care of the entire block for the last 10 years. And I think that our ability to build coalition and bring in partners to add the data and research to our lived experiences is what really took our organizing efforts over the top. The Fruit Belt is very much still a place where folks come out on porches and speak to neighbors, and everyone knows what's going on through word of mouth. But a lot of times I think that the lived experiences, especially of poor people and folks whose voices aren't necessarily heard, fall on deaf ears. And because we were able to have resources such as PPG, Push, LISC, volunteer lawyers at the table, we were able to express what our concerns were and have them validated by data and research and the Esquires and the things that go after names that legitimize your claims, so that we were really able to like open up the ears of folks, and then that turned into like an opening of minds and then an opening of hearts. And I think that is what we were able to do very well, is like center the voices of the residents and the impacted folks, and then surround that with the data and the research to back up the experience of folks on the ground.
Jessica, a lot of the same kind of stereotypes, cliches that I used to hear about the Fruit Belt neighborhood are the exact same ones that get used about Buffalo parents in public schools. Impossible to organize, fractious, uninvolved. And your work, like India's, has really disproved those stereotypes so effectively. Talk a little bit about what worked for you in terms of gaining understanding and knowledge about issues involved in school wellness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so much of what India is saying resonates with me and my experience and overlaps our work in Buffalo Public Schools. You know, we are the people, right? We're the change that has to happen. And we started this, you know, as parents, for parents and caregivers and students. So that lived experience, and, you know, one of the things that we've said with our community health worker model, which is folks that are of and from the communities that they serve, that have those close and trusting relationships, and have that lived experience. And we say nothing about us without us is for us. So folks were really making decisions for us. And, you know, the reality when I got involved 10 years ago, the District Parent Coordinating Council was the only parent group. And a couple years before I got involved, you couldn't even get into the school buildings. I mean, there wasn't even a visitor's entrance mark. They would stop you at the door. I mean, it was really that oppressive of an environment. So they had opened up that space a little bit. And you know, one of the pieces of our work was creating healthier schools. And it was really, you know, centering the parents and students and talking about what mattered to us, and going and campaigning for that type of thing. So we had lived experience, and we would show up at Board of Education meetings and say, these are the things that we're observing in our schools. It's not a healthy and safe environment. Why are you feeding this to our kids? Why aren't you teaching them about life skills and engaging in healthy behaviors? Why are you teaching them curriculum that is totally disconnected from reality and is not culturally responsive or trauma informed? And then we had an ally in the system, the former director of health-related services for Buffalo Public Schools, who was really connected to state and national work, and said, you know, there's this tool called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that the Center for Disease Control and Prevention does. And, you know, if you can advocate for that, we can have real data that matches your kind of qualitative lived experience. So one of our first things that we did was, it was the health chairperson of the District Parent Coordinating Council at the time, Patricia Elliott, went to the board meeting and said, we want this to be done. So long story short, they did that data analysis, and then we had real data to say, you know, 35% of the kids were overweight or obese, you know, really high rates of children who are experiencing violence, who had seen someone beaten, shot, or killed, you know. So you couldn't just say, these are some crazy parents showing up saying stuff. We had real data. And from there, we were able to work with Partnership for the Public Good and folks that had policy and research expertise. And we created a table that we had folks from schools, from the district, policy experts, people who had expertise around this whole child model to come together and write a wellness policy that became the template for change moving forward.
So like India, you were able to really successfully weave together the voices of the most impacted people, the children and the parents, with the sort of national and local experts, and blend those two things together. That youth risk behavior survey that you and your colleagues persuaded the district to start doing, which is this amazing resource of data, it's one of the most frightening data sources I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the health and well-being of our public school students is shockingly bad on so many measures. But to have that measured well is so important for the work that you do. It reminds me very much of the fact that the successful stop and frisk legislation in New York City, or court case in New York City, that pretty much ended the stop and frisk policy of the New York City police, it came from the fact that they had data. They had the receipts showing what happened in all those stops, something that had been won from an earlier lawsuit. And it was that data that enabled them to show the amazingly racially disparate nature of those stops and frisks. So good data can do a lot for you. Rawa, let's turn to you and ask this same question of how do you go up in terms of climate justice? How have you gone about learning the issue both from the community and from the other types of experts?
I think it's actually very much similar to what India and Jessica really talked about. And I also find it really interesting. Their models are very circular. They're very regenerative. So with the New York Renews Coalition, we really started with the premise of, we know that the transition to a regenerative and clean energy economy is inevitable, but justice is not. So how do we center justice and not do the thing that is politically expedient, but do what is right for our communities? And so it really started with us rooting and coming up with what is our values as a coalition. So it started with 20 organizations, that's now over 200 organizations, but in the beginning it was just us 20 across every region in New York State. And we came up with what we call our points of unity. What are the group agreements? What is our process? And how we're going to work with each other in an ecosystem where there's going to be a very clear inside and outside game or strategy. And so from that, we also adopted the Hamesh principles for democratic organizing, which really actually centers people who normally don't have the loudest voices, that included, people of color leaders and organizations and folks that were really focused on climate justice. And part of New York Renew's really brilliant strategy is this idea of what is actually powerful is when people are emotionally connected to a legislation, because we know there's a lot of legalese in legislation. And so our base building was very much rooted in people's stories from each of those communities. Then we had, of course, our research and policy, and we looked to states that had already passed some pretty progressive climate legislation, California being the greatest, but we knew that they were 10 years ahead of us. So we used their research and their basis of the legislation to begin ours as the foundation. But because we were 10 years ahead, we asked for more advanced requirements on 100% clean renewable energy by 2050. They had 25% of direct investments in frontline communities. We asked for 40, and that was really based on what is the energy burden of low-income people in New York State, and it's about 40%. So that's where we started. And then, of course, there is a media strategy. There is an actual policy strategy, and we had a pretty robust circular way that we all work together. But how do we communicate with each other, and how is decision making happen was one of the most critical pieces that I think got us to where we got to. And like I said, there were people that were part of the coalition that had been trying to pass a climate legislation for more than a decade, and we were able to achieve our goal within 4 years.
Rama, one of the methods that Push has used from the very beginning is very extensive, consistent door knocking. And that's a tool that not that many people use anymore. And I wonder if you just quickly talk about how you do door knocking well and what you learned from it that you might not learn from other sources, why it's so important to Push.
Absolutely. I think this slide really documents very well We always say people first, and that we know what we want where we live. And we use a very simple phrase, which is the people that are closest to the pain have the best solutions. A very simple story about that and why door knocking and canvassing really works, and actually the amount of monthly meetings that we have whenever we're doing a development project, how we engage our members every step of the way so that they are learning with us, but they're able to also give us input on design and things like that. So School 77, wonderful building that we renovated, it was a 4-year process from start to finish. First, it was the community that told Push Buffalo, this is a priority for our neighborhood. We know that developers are coming to look at it, and we want it to remain a community asset. So Push needs to take control. I said, okay. So we immediately, within 30 days, were able to knock on over 600 doors with a very simple palm card that we print ourselves and ask people, do you want Push to do this? If so, what would you like to see there? So then we took that and we used that as the leverage. That's our power, and took it to our common council member, who then was able to get a moratorium of developer designation for that building for 1 year. Then we continued to meet with the community and continue to ask them what do they want to see over that time, and we began to have meetings. And it was from that the development of the building happened. For example, we didn't know it was going to be senior housing, but that was one of the needs. So we use a criteria filter to communicate back to our community and our members what is happening, because it's a back and forth process as the development happens. They wanted 800 things to happen in that building. We have 5 amazing things that happened, but the community selected that. And one thing that I'm just want to give you an example of how we engage. It's intergenerational. So when we decided what we could afford and build and what the community really wanted was senior housing, the young people that were part of that planning immediately said, well, then we want it to be intergenerationally programmed. And the elders in the community love that. And so then they began to work together. And so that's how we ended up putting a little pocket park outside. But I don't know about you, Sam. I haven't been in a pocket park in quite a long time. I'm not really sure what we should build. So we engaged that with 5 and 7-year-olds that got to help plan what they would like in that. Just like the elder members got to make decisions about, how the building itself was going to be utilized that was more manageable for elders. And I have to tell you, I love our members so much. One of the things that Luz Velez looked in my eye and said, well, we're going to start a new committee of Push. It's going to be called Push Silver, giving the elders a voice, because I love you, Rawa, but you don't know anything about seniors, which was the truth. And so I think that's, when we listen to people and their stories, and they're the people that are going to be utilizing these things, when we source that information, then we're able to actually build more relevant, usable projects.
I think one thing that what you've all done has in common is that you actually operationalized this idea that the people are the experts. You don't just say it, but you have found ways to actually put their expertise in the front. We've been joined by Justin Booth. He's the executive director of Go Bike Buffalo, and I want to weave him into the conversation if we're able. Justin, let's circle back and ask you the question I asked everyone in the beginning, which is, as a result of the advocacy and organizing that you and others have done, how are Buffalo's streets different today when it comes to bicyclists, pedestrians, nature?
Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on this panel with so many of my peers that I look up to. So I think it starts back when I was a kid growing up in Brooklyn, spending a lot of time with my grandparents, and being able to walk outside with my grandfather, walk around the corner, go to one shop for the bagels, another shop for the lox, like another place to get your eggs and milk, all within a local, easy walking radius, and really, the interactions that we had with our neighbors. And then fast forward, coming to Buffalo for college, going to Buffalo State, one of the first things that you see on your experience coming into the city is an expressway that cuts through a park. And so, started taking a look at, what are the challenges in terms of our transportation system, and how it's really had a negative impact upon our city and upon our community. transportation and the infrastructure that supports our transportation is massive, and so much dollars goes into it on a regular basis. But we've designed it to really perpetuate the haves and have-nots. We've really created a system that makes you dependent upon a vehicle. And if you choose to walk or to bike or to take public transit, it's a secondary option, or the only option that you necessarily have. So back in 2008, my background being in public health and just seeing the rise of overweight and obesity, one of the things that we've been seeing cities across the country really focused on was an effort called Complete Streets. Really thinking about how we design our streets in a way that really accommodates everybody. And, traffic engineers have historically always focused on how quickly can we move vehicles from point A to point B. They use vehicular level of service, which is their subjective measure of how much congestion we can tolerate at an intersection during peak time. And they count a single vehicle at that intersection the same as, say, a bus carrying 30 people. So it's really always focused on vehicular throughput. So our efforts in 2008, Buffalo was the first city in New York State to pass a Complete Streets policy. The state followed suit back in 2012. And it really, forces our municipalities to spend their money in a way that looks at all modes and all people. Not how many vehicles are moving through a corridor, but how many people are moving through the corridor, and how are we doing it safely? We know that our streets are one of the greatest public assets that we have. It represents a significant portion of the public land that we have in the city, but it's primarily used for one purpose, where when designed as a complete street, it could really have a really positive benefit, whether it's, connecting with neighbors and community, improving safety outcomes, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving public health outcomes, because, so often those 1 mile trips around the corner might be close enough to walk to, but certainly not safe to do so. And all these things kind of build that quality of life in our communities that so many of us desire and are after, and can really spark a significant change in the way that we interact with our neighbors and communities, and build that connectedness that we want throughout our city.
One thing that's nice about the work that you do is that it's very physically apparent. You can bicycle or walk around the city of Buffalo now, and you'll see bicycle lanes, and you'll see tree plantings and bump outs and things that simply weren't there years ago, and that make a huge difference in our quality of life. And as you point out, very important for equity issues, given who can afford a car, who can't, who's segregated into neighborhoods with bad air quality that comes a lot from vehicle emissions. It's a really important component of an equitable city as well. I want to transition us now to talk about our next strategy, which is building people power, both from individual residents and from organizations. How do you go about getting the allies that you need to win your campaign? And we'll start with you, Lucine. So with the work around Canalside, what were some of the lessons you learned about building people power?
Well, I think the first thing that we learned and thought of is that there's a history to what you can tap into. In the case of Canalside, the preservationists had been fighting to keep some part of the Erie Canal in Buffalo as a public space. And so we started, and I agree so much with everything that my colleagues have said here, of being deeply rooted in the community. These kind of efforts require deep roots in the community. So looking at what preservationists had achieved and using coalitions of coalitions to bring out a sense of what the public good would be. So we worked with the Coalition for Economic Justice that brought in unions and other economic justice organizations, itself a big coalition, with Voice Buffalo that represented the faith community for more equitable economic development. Of course, as you know, Sam and others, and as all of you have said, PPG as a kind of a master coalition for local research was very important. And we also have a long history here in Buffalo of Cornell ILR working on economic development, whether it is on strengthening labor management cooperation or working on innovative strategies for a more equitable economy, what we often call high road economic development. Cornell ILR played an important role in understanding this and rooting it in a system of mutual interest. We had worked over time, even nationally, with other organizations in other cities and doing research on community benefit agreements. And we have a wonderful group of high roaders who come here as students from all over the country who are Cornell students to work with community organizations in Buffalo. They helped with research on what could be possible to develop Canal Side with a public purpose. And the coalition grew. The Public Accountability Initiative brought in more people and more research, more relevance to this particular situation as they showed how the Bass Pro had taken public subsidies in other places and not resulted in the jobs or the development that they had promised. So again, I would say that being deeply rooted in the community, holding forums in all parts of the city, getting the ideas of a wide range of people for what Canal Side could be, including local entrepreneurs. Mark Goldman brought in the Project for Public Spaces, and there was a vision for what else could happen. So I think those deep roots and that broad sense of community power is largely what made it successful.
One of the things that worked in that campaign is that there was really an ecosystem of groups working on it. Some of them didn't agree with each other on a lot of different things, and they had very different roles that they played, but they were all going in overall the same direction. And I think that's a model that can be very useful to think about for coalitions, is to think about them sort of as an ecosystem. Others in the call have mentioned having an inside and an outside strategy, but kind of accepting the fact that different groups have very different strategies, different philosophies, but that they can all play a constructive role even without agreeing with each other on a lot of things. India, one of my favorite examples of people power from the Fruit Belt is when you staged a one-woman demonstration about the parking problems using yellow caution tape that you bought at the store, calling an impromptu press conference. And I think that's a good example of how just one person can exert people power. But I think much more common in your work has been the coalition building and the base building, working with residents. What have you learned about what works, what doesn't work in people power building?
Yeah, so like, I think that was a great moment, and I love reflecting on it, but there was so much work that had gone in prior to that time. I think that what I was able to bring to the Fruit Belt table was just like sort of that young energy and ignorance. I'll call it that. I'll call it ignorance, right? I didn't know what I was doing. I was super frustrated. I was tired of going to meeting after meeting and nothing changing. And I wanted other people to know what was actually happening behind the scenes. But I think that what I take away most from our work that we've been able to accomplish in the Fruit Belt is to keep showing up, right? To stay the course. Everyone's not going to always agree. I've been asked many times, like, what my theory of change is. Like, I don't know, organizers are weird. Like, they want to know, like, what you actually believe. And I don't think that a lot of us think about that a lot of the time. But like, after reflecting on the work that I've done over the course of the last several years, I believe that my theory of change is love, right? it's love. What I do and how I'm driven and how I want to be surrounded is by people who love each other enough to disagree, to fight, but always come back together for the common good of us all. And that boils down to people and community. When I did this demonstration, the elders around the table in the fruit bowl, they were mad as hell. They were like, why would you do that? You've pissed off City Hall. Like, that doesn't make any sense. We thought we were gaining traction. But I think, like, the result in hindsight, right, was like the campaign sort of needed that infusion of energy and wildness that really provided the political cover for our elected officials to get that legislation pushed through at the state and local level.
It's another example of that ecosystem where even though you were acting in a way that other people disagreed with, it happened to work. I remember at the time, I thought, oh, what has India done? She went rogue. And I thought that for about 48 hours, and then I realized that it worked. Jessica, I think of you as someone who has really studied public meetings, public events, community meetings, and how to get the most out of them. And I wonder if you can share with our audience some lessons learned, some tips for how to successfully do the public event or the community meeting. It's such an important tool, but it's one that often doesn't get used that well.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to lift up again, love being at the center of this work is so important. Thanks for saying that, India. Because I think that people can feel that, right? And so I think no matter what we're doing, making sure that we're leading with love and, that people feel loved when they show up is so important. And that's how we've tried to operate as community health workers and as parent organizers as well. And a lot of it has been making spaces fun. So whether it's, being in front of City Hall, like in our early years, we would do a rally for recess and bring, jump ropes and hula hoops and balls. And we would have recess in front of City Hall before we went to the Board of Ed meeting. And at that time too, we would get frozen out of Board of Ed meetings. They would go into executive session and we would be there with our kids. I remember my kids were small then, kindergarten and pre-K, not even in school yet. And we'd be sitting in City Hall for like 5 hours. So we learned, bring snacks, bring games for the kids to play, and, just try to meet people where they're at and their needs. So just being in that constant conversation, talking to folks with, little kids and bigger kids, how do we help folks to participate in ways that work for them? So whether it would be more of the traditional, going to all the Board of Education meetings, going to City Hall, doing rallies, things like that, or doing things that really feel good and nourishing to folks. So anything from, building school and community gardens, that was one of our most successful projects and still is. We have community gardens at almost all of the Buffalo Public Schools now. And so there's a picture here from my children's school, International School of 45, our first year of planting a garden. And we had a lot of resistance against doing that. Folks thought, this is a bad neighborhood, the garden is going to get destroyed. And we just had everybody come out and be invested in that, the parents and students and the neighbors, and also our building principal and teachers and community partners. And that's really how we've tried to operate. And again, always just trying to center what works for parents and students. So asking parents to come to a meeting without it being a nourishing space for their kids. We're working, we're dealing with all these things. If you're not creating something enriching for the kids, if you're not mindful that, little kids have to go to bed, need to get fed, need homework help, all of that, or the kids aren't being engaged in a meaningful way, it's not going to work, right? We also have worked with students. So as we started to organize more, we developed a parent and student community health worker training program where we trained parents and students themselves to be leaders in this work. And they actually developed, the students came up with this idea of, not doing an old and boring health fair, but this event called WOW, which stood for Wellness Our Way. And so we made that event. It was basically like, set it up like a party, right? So what are the elements of a successful party? You want good music and dancing. We would bring in professional DJs, good food, and they helped plan the menu. So they would do a taco bar or something that, they wanted that would be, kid friendly, like healthy food doesn't have to be distasteful, right? and just set it up in a fun and fresh way with partners that could do activities that were really hands-on and experiential, have different spaces for parents, for little kids, for older kids and teens. And again, just make things as engaging and interactive as possible, and constantly learning from folks, and you know, making things feel fun and nourishing and fresh all the time.
So India used the word love. You echoed that, and then also used the word fun. When I was in law school learning about advocacy, they never taught me about love and fun in those classes. So I try and teach my students that love and fun are part of it. And I asked them, what would make you go to a meeting about a public policy issue in the evening after you came home from work or from school? Honestly, what would get you to go? And it seems to me the things that would get you to go are things like you just mentioned, like food and childcare. But fun would be critical. And then relationships, or love is another word for good relationships. If someone you cared about called you and asked you to go to that meeting, that would dramatically increase the chances that you would actually go, compared to seeing a flyer saying, here's an important issue in our community, you should show up tonight. So I'm really happy that we're talking about love and fun.
And Sam, could we add music? Could we add music?
Absolutely,
Because
music.
the organizer for Canal Side, Michaela, was an awesome singer. So we had music as a part of the rallies to demand meetings with public officials, and I think that's a very important. This gives a sense of the culture of community-rooted change, because it taps into all kinds of things that in a democratic society the people bring to the party and to the change process.
Yeah, Lucien, you're reminding me that Michaela and Harper Bishop, who at that time was with Buffalo First, brought a band to a meeting of the Harbor Development Corporation and set up in the lobby of the meeting, if I remember it right. It really blew their minds on that occasion. And so that was a great example of something that was fun, was musical, and really worked extremely well, and of course got great press attention. So let's turn to that question of telling your story, whether it's through the press, whether it's through word of mouth, whether it's through social media. Raul, that's something that you have a lot of experience with. You're involved with theater as well as with community development and organizing. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned about how to tell the story effectively.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what India and Jessica and Lucien really talked about is just the power of relationships. That, of course, like this work it's not a straight line, it's not linear. You're going to do all kinds of zigzagging to try to figure out whatever the end solutions are going to be. And the tactics are going to change, and we may not always agree, and that's okay. But I think if we have deep relationships and are in practice with each other in an authentic way, then people are going to come along for the ride. You know, we're doing it together. It's power with, it's not power over. And I think that the one tool that we've gotten much better at in our movement world is this idea of narrative, but also cultural organizing. Because as we work more and more in a more holistic way, you have to really understand it. It's a lot of complexity to hold. And so, you know, even trying to describe Push's work or trying to pass the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And so as part of our Crossroads work here and trying to explain what is a just transition and the complexity of that, Ujima Company actually did some devised theater and worked with not traditional actors, some traditional actors, but mostly just everyday people that came in over a year-long period. How they built community and did collective work and responsibility with each other was to actually just talk about their own experiences, how the climate crisis or economic inequality or racial inequality impacted them personally. And it also really focused on Buffalo, you know, so many of us in Buffalo know what each other's stories are. We know what each other's neighborhoods are. So they did a devised play called Free Fred Brown that's now, of course, toured across, you know, different parts of the state and in Ohio. But it was a 2-hour play could actually talk about generations of history, the moment, how we're being impacted, and can make them understand this very complex way of how everything is actually interconnected in a visceral way. And it's so powerful. And it's also powerful, not just for the people that are witnessing, but also for the people that are a part of it that went through all of this. It just creates just a connection that is really impenetrable. And so more and more we're using cultural organizing as part of our work. We have a wonderful play right now called The Legacy of Lead that's in partnership with Partnership for Public Good, Connect, Push, and Ujima. And again, it's people that have been impacted by lead poisoning. It includes children, it includes families, it includes, what is it like to navigate the justice system? What is it to navigate, Department of Health and all of these other ways in a way that just makes it much more tangible and concrete. And it's really a tool to also educate people on the issue, but not by beating them over the head by saying, hey, have you experienced this? So I'll leave it at that. And I just also highlight, yes, love, justice, collective work, and responsibility. And this work is messy, but it's also beautiful.
One of the things about everyone on this panel is that you've all done things that I thought were impossible. And Free Fred Brown, the play that you described, I really thought it was impossible to have a play about energy poverty and climate justice in Buffalo that would be funny, incredibly entertaining, moving. And Free Fred Brown had incredible songs, it had incredible dancing, it had gripping stories. It was an absolutely fantastic play, unbelievable success. And as you said, it started with the stories that were true stories told by the people who were making the play. Really an amazing piece of work. Justin Booth, you at Go Bike, you really pay close attention to the media, to the press, to how to use it successfully. You write op-eds, you do letters to the editor, you make events that are newsworthy. Tell us a little bit about, over the years, what you've learned works or doesn't work in telling your story and in press strategy.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways to really engage the press. And I think it's really important when we're talking about, changing culture. I mean, our driving habits have been cemented for the last 100 years. And it's been really important for us to kind of be the opinion leaders, pulling the research, pulling the data, listening to communities, giving people an opportunity to experience our legacy infrastructure in a way that they never have before. And so, as you said, Sam, it's getting letters into the editor. It's getting community members in front of the editorial board. It's getting the opportunities to push our news items out and really speaking to the issues that we're trying to address, and making sure that there's another side to the coin in which the official narrative is being pushed. The images are being showed are some of the issues that we faced historically. The first one was of the Science Museum prior to the Kensington Expressway being put in. We had an incredible park and parkway system that really connected our communities together, that really supported that interaction, that small business development, and was an incredible community around that area. That decision makers over time decided that the easiest route to get people out to the suburbs was, of course, putting expressway down the middle. And so many 70,000 vehicles a day uses the Humboldt, what was the Humboldt Parkway, which is now Kensington Expressway, at the detriment to the neighborhoods that surround it, and the negative impact that's had. It's considered one of the most detrimental impacts that we've done to ourselves in our city, all to get people out to the suburbs more quickly in the afternoon. And of course, one of the main things that we hear from the Restore Community Coalition, which has been working for many years to reconnect their community back together again, is the impact that this expressway has had on air quality and, of course, the health outcomes, the negative health outcomes from that. And so one of the things that we have certainly focused a lot of attention on is, as I mentioned, giving people an opportunity to experience this infrastructure in a different way. And so when we started the Sky Ride, it was originally intended simply as, how do we give people an opportunity to ride their bikes in the city in a way that they haven't done before? And of course, that was giving them the ability to ride across the Skyway and the incredible views that we all experience when we drive over it. But when you get an opportunity to ride your bicycle over it and see the views of Lake Erie and the density of downtown, it's quite incredible. And there's been a lot of people talking for many years about, how we take that down and open up this land for redevelopment. And what we learned listening to people participating in this event was, well, maybe we could just reallocate that space to people. How can we make it a park in the sky and let people to walk across it and bike across it? What is do we need to tear down this infrastructure? When we, can put people through on the Kensington Expressway or the Skajackwit Expressway, so many people didn't realize that was once our park and parkway system. And so it's really trying to open people's eyes to what was there, what the potential opportunities are in the future, and really driving the conversation around what that change can look like and how it can have a positive benefit in our surrounding communities. And of course, leveraging the media to help us tell that story and to, disrupt the official narrative has been an incredibly valuable part of the work that we've been doing.
Justin, we were just talking about the importance of fun, and I have to say that riding my bike on the Skyway on your Skyride event was one of the most fun things I've ever done in Buffalo. It was just incredibly fun, and riding down the 33, you felt this sense of triumph that you were occupying this horrible highway meant for cars, and that you were maybe part of moving slowly toward changing it. And so I want to highlight that, but also the fact that the strategies that we're talking about so often can coalesce around different events or different tools that are getting used. So your Skyride was a fundraiser, and let's never forget the importance of raising money for this work. But it was also a way of telling a story. It was also experiential learning for all the people who went on it and who read about it and heard about it. It was an advocacy strategy. So it was so many things at once. And those are often, of course, the most successful events, the ones that do combine these different tools into one package. Lou Jean, I want to ask you about the storytelling. Were there things that you learned in Canalside that you can share about press strategy or other forms of communication that you thought worked well?
Yes, I would point to several things. And by the way, there were 2 plays about Erie Canal that happened during this time period in the summer, so that people learned about the history of Erie Canal as it was going along. So that was part of the story. And again, an aspect of cultural organizing. And I think that another thing that we would want to point to is you used the word occupy a little bit ago. Because the idea was planted in the public's mind that you didn't have to have a Bass Pro and a big development like that down there in order to have something that the whole community could profit from, the lighter, quicker, cheaper approach put Adirondack chairs on Canalside. And so in a sense, people just went down there and occupied the place. And there was a notion that, wow, this would be good for us to have as a common experience and a common space. So that was part of the story. It was an evolution of what development means in Buffalo's inner harbor in this case. And of course, it continues to be asked about what does the outer harbor mean and who gets to control it and what is the story that we want to develop about the way we use our public spaces. And so there's so much commonality, I think, among all of the development strategies that we're talking about today. And a lot of it has to do with what is the public and what is public space, what is public development, how do we preserve in our community things that bring us together. And so we told that story by saying what was positive, by utilizing experience of our public space, and then also by releasing reports about alternatives. For example, the report that showed what development like Bass Pro actually led to, which was not anything that it claimed to. And I think the other way the story was told is so important. The PPG community agenda included a demand for a community benefit agreement in 2008. We finally got the thing in 2012, again, a 4-year campaign to achieve the statement of principles on Buffalo's waterfront. And so there were almost all aspects of getting public information out about the vision for a different Buffalo's waterfront and how we could create it is, I think, the way the story evolved. I would just say one other thing, and this may relate a little bit more to what we're going to talk about next about relationships with government and everything, but we had a fairly clear demand. And so people felt like, well, in a democracy, we ought to get to demand of our elected officials and representatives something that works for us. And again, I think that is true of all of the campaigns and the successes we're talking about today.
So Justin talked about the public infrastructure that we, the people, own, but is not always delivering the kind of benefits to all of our community that should. Eugene, you talked about the land both on the inner and the outer harbor that the public owns, and the idea of sort of occupying it and really getting to people to feel like, wait a minute, this is our land. Let's us decide what happens to it. India, that's such a potent theme in the Fruit Belt as well, where the city has owned over 240 vacant lots. And a big part of your strategy that's, I think, really important for the city as a whole is the claiming of those vacant lots, those city-owned lots, as public assets, as public land. And I think that when we get everyone in Buffalo to understand that we, the people, own 8,000 vacant lots, and we should have a really beneficial public strategy for them, will have come a long way. I remember you all putting signs up in the vacant lots that sort of occupied them and claimed them. So you have a lot of experience with that. Feel free to comment on that, and then let's transition and ask you. One of the most intimidating things, I think, for people just getting involved with this work is working directly with elected officials, going to meet them in their offices, calling them on their phone. It's scary for a lot of people. You now have a lot of experience with it, so would love to hear some of your tips for successful work with elected officials.
Sure. So yeah, we marked every city-owned vacant lot in the Fruit Belt with those signs, and the city promptly had workers come out and remove them faster than we could ever get those lots mowed. So that was an interesting time. So we need relationships with elected officials in order to really effectuate change, right? And it can be both intimidating and also, I'm looking for a word, I can't think of it right now, enticing, I guess, right? To be in proximity to power. And a lot of times, like when that door is opened, people kind of like roll over and concede to whatever they're offered instead of like staying the course with the pie in the sky demands. And I think that my number one piece of advice for folks who may feel intimidated contacting elected officials or meeting with elected officials or even other sorts of people in power, because when we really peel back the layers, it's not the elected that really has the power. Like it's the funders, the lobbyists, the unions, the other folks right behind it. But I think my number one piece of advice is they work for us, right? So when I go in to meet with an elected, I'm the boss, actually, right? Not only am I the boss because you work for the people, but also I know that the people who put you where you are on my side, right? So I come in and I speak for the folks who put you there. And if you are not going to advocate on our behalf, then we'll just replace you with someone who will. And for folks who sit in these seats, that's a real threat. especially when you come to their office with 200 people, right? And 200 people doesn't sound like a whole bunch, but this is Buffalo. We have a very low voter turnout, even in major elections. So the fact that you could turn out 200 or 300 people to Niagara Square or City Hall or wherever is a big deal. And it proves that whatever issue you're fighting for has merit. I think that going back to like telling the story in public narrative, like that's everything, right? We're a one newspaper town, and whatever the Buffalo News says is kind of gospel. So we went from a place of like, gentrification is not an issue, this is Buffalo, housing is still very affordable, to flipping that narrative on its head and having displacement and gentrification and development and 485A, which is a tax break that's given to large developments, be a part of the mainstream conversation. So that in and of itself, right, whatever the dominant narrative is what politicians, I guess, or people in power kind of roll with, right? So now they have had to change their narrative from this is not a Buffalo issue because we're a small, poor, Rust Belt city to, oh, actually, like we do need to be addressing the affordable housing crisis, and we do need to be addressing climate change, and we do need to ensure that public resources are being used for the public good. So, you know, we've had a progression over the years of being the others and outsiders and crazy activists asking for weird, wonky things to being partners with government and really figuring out how we solve these problems together. So that's something that's super encouraging. Still difficult, but encouraging nonetheless.
Yeah, I want to highlight a couple of tools that you all have mentioned. India, you mentioned the importance of before you go meet with an elected official, peeling back the onion and seeing who are their donors, who are the lobbyists, who influence them. And our partners at Public Accountability Initiative have a great website, Little Sis, that you can use to help you map the power. And that's an exercise a lot of our partners use, is power mapping. One I really recommend when you're first starting to tackle an issue, you make a power map of who controls this issue and who controls them, and what are the links between them, what are the relationships, and what power do we have on our side, and how do we implement it. And Justin mentioned in working with the media, the editorial board of the newspaper. In India, you just pointed out how important the Buffalo News opinion is on a given issue. And a lot of people, I think even experienced advocates, don't realize that you can call up the Buffalo News editorial board get a meeting with them and pitch your ideas and try and get them to write an editorial on your behalf and at least educate them on the issue. And I think that's just a really important practical tool that I know all of you use, but I think people should use more, as well as some of the more traditional ones. Jessica, you've worked a lot with school superintendents, school boards, top school administrators. Do you have some tips for building relationships with them? And one thing I want to get your comment on is, India mentioned that power can be enticing. And a really common strategy we see elected officials use is the commission or the committee that dilutes the energy around an issue, deflects it, delays it, and lets it dissipate. But it can also be a way to make change. It's a real double-edged sword. And I think of everyone here on the panel has had experience in using committees and commissions and that sort of thing to advance change and make sure you don't get co-opted. So I'd particularly love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think just folks being aware of the infrastructure of Buffalo Public Schools and boards of education in general. I think a lot of folks don't realize that the Buffalo Public Schools budget is $1 billion. It's significantly more than the city of Buffalo. We have, 30,000 plus students. And I think what's so important is our work to educate our parents and caregivers, many of whom had very negative experiences with the school system, and our students to ask questions and understand, as many of our fellow panelists have said, like, we are the people with the power. The Board of Education members need to be responding to us. I think it's very challenging. I mean, without getting into the whole history of Buffalo Public Schools and school segregation, but just understanding what an oppressive system it is. You know, after Brown versus Board of Education, Buffalo Public Schools wasn't desegregated until the 70s when there was a court order to do so. And data right now shows that it's actually more segregated than it's ever been. And so just knowing that that system is set up and being able to, you know, go in with data and meet parents where they're at, because it's very intimidating and it's difficult to make your voice heard, to go to a Board of Education meeting. There were several of us that were on the virtual platform last night, and just even navigating that can be so challenging. So I think it's important for us to see how we can band together. You know, we've done a lot of work training parents and students in kind of Advocacy 101. This is what's happening and why. What do you care about? How can we help amplify your voice? And so just knowing, you know, who's your Board of Education member based on where your child goes to school and where you live, that there's at-large board members as well, and who's responsible for what in the district. And that's part of the work that we've tried to do, but I think it is a different type of system to navigate that unless you're inside it, it's hard to kind of figure out how it all works. And so being able to also just say that too, you know, that the communication and navigating the infrastructure is really challenging. And again, a lot of there's finally some work around culturally and linguistic responsive teaching, trauma-informed approaches, restorative justice and restorative practices in the schools. But we're coming from a place of families and communities that have been deeply traumatized and had a lot of challenges. So how do we address that? You know, I've heard India say before, we have to have social services and social justice come together. And I think that that's part of the work in education. And if we can kind of get to some of these root causes and get into educate students about how they can make change, we can make a significant difference. And those student voices are so incredibly powerful. We know that when we show up with students to speak to board members and elected officials, even more than us as parents, they're listened. So that's something that we want to continue to do and do more of, is really center the experiences of our youth.
For folks listening to today's workshop, I want to be sure to remind you that on the PPG website, if you go to the action section, you will find a lot of tools, tips for meeting with elected officials, tips for working with the media, how to write a letter to the editor, a lot of really practical tools that you can use as you do this work. So just wanted to highlight that. Rawa Push has a lot of experience working with elected officials and trying to navigate that fine line of being able to challenge them for change and protest them and complain about them, and then also work with them to make things happen, to write new laws like the climate justice legislation. You need elected officials to actually take your calls and work with you. So how do you do that? How do you be both challenging and collaborative at the same time as you work with elected officials?
Well, there's no simple answer, and it doesn't always go, you know, the same with every elected official. I think that where Push has really done an incredible job is we usually activate our members. There's long periods of training, engagement around the issue, so that our members, when they do go to do any direct actions, that they actually are very knowledgeable about the issues and can speak to them. And so we do a whole host of things. First, there's direct action, but generally we don't start with the direct action. We really start with trying to build relationship with our elected officials, whether it's at the local level or state level. We do a lot of in-district meetings, and we do that actually with the people on the front lines. It may be youth, it may be elders, just, you know, a little bit of everyone. And then from there, you know, we have different tactics that we use depending on what we're pushing. Is it a legislation? Is it a different kind of a thing? And so we will kind of thread the needle. But what I do want to say is that our work is really rooted in a political analysis and movement history and understanding and what are the issue cuts. And so it takes a lot of work before we get to that place. Once we are there, then we have multiple strategies and tactics that we use depending on our level of success in what we are doing. And so there may be moments of escalation tactics or just kind of really to show community solidarity and let our elected officials know there are a lot of people behind us that want the same thing. It's not us, it's our people that are up front. And so, you know, it's a complicated thing. But I would say that our power has always been by the amount of people that we are able to bring. Maybe you guys have heard of push, all the branding that we do. When people show up in large numbers, when people listen. And so those are all of the different tactics that we use. But what I want to say, what's really shifting and changing that I've appreciated over the last couple of decades in community organizing is, we went from kind of like this very traditional Saul Alinsky model of, this is what you do, this is the campaign, this amount of numbers, whereas we kind of like have an iterative and evolving way. If we've had a win, maybe we didn't get all of our wins, we continue to build on that. So we really started, for example, in our climate work, addressing people's and trying to meet people's energy needs. And so some of the ways that we do that, as you can see by the examples of these really beautiful photos, is we take some of the properties that are in our portfolio, take them out and do highly community engaged planning around what is the right amount of an energy burden for the economy of our neighborhood. And in our neighborhood, people pay between 25 up to 40% of their utility bill. And really most of the national average is that about 6% of your income should go towards your utilities on an annual basis. And so we're able to practice, as you can see, these are men and women from our neighborhood that are learning how to install solar panels on our roof. So that we also use things like we've learned from PPG and that waterfront campaign where we have community benefits agreements that we have designed to make sure that people are being paid family sustaining wages, that they are receiving paid time off, treated with dignity, and have health benefits. And then, if you can go back to that previous slide, Kristen. The greenhouse on the lower, that one, we really practice with energy and energy tools. So that is a net zero house. We think it's the first one in the country where we rehab a home that really should have been probably tore down and into a net zero house. But the men and women from our neighborhood got to learn how to use these new energy systems like geothermal, thermal solar array, a solar array in the back of the house. And so these are the same people that then get to advocate for the policies that we are pushing. They're able to say, hey, I went through the PUSH program and learned what a geothermal system is. And this is what kind of systems we should have in our neighborhood because I too suffer from, high cost energy burdens. And so there's kind of like this really regenerative, we call it a virtuous regenerative circle. And I think that organizing in general has shifted to that way, just like it has shifted in recognizing the understanding of what Jessica was referring to, which is going to the root causes, right? Because campaigns in and of themselves aren't doing the structural change for long-term solutions. And that means because all the systems are interconnected, let's actually broaden our base building to include folks in education. And when you think about a healthy home and a green and healthy home, what are the impacts to a family? And, when you have housing security, what does that mean for a child going to school and that kind of stability? And when you have a home that's not making you sick and is riddled with lead, it's got this kind of virtuous circle. So we've kind of broaden our view around what is the ecosystem and then how can we work together on issue campaigns that are much stronger that actually get us to the longer term solutions permanently.
Rawa, you mentioned a simple tool that PUSH is used really well, which is your branding, that you have t-shirts and hoodies and other things that your members wear when they show up at public meetings so that all the elected officials and the press and the public know that you're there. That's a really simple tool that's amazingly powerful. And it's part of working with elected officials, but it's also a communication strategy and a base building strategy. So again, these tools ideally work together very well. You and India both mentioned how important it is to have numbers, to have your base building when you go to those elected officials, not just so that they know that you have support around an issue and that it's an important issue, but so that they think, my constituents care about this, and they'll vote me out of office if I don't address it. So that the tools do go together. Justin, I want to turn to you. One theme in your work that's true of a lot of our work is that passing a law is sometimes about 5 to 10% of the struggle. And I know you had that experience with Complete Streets, where it was actually fairly easy to get it passed, but really hard to implement it. And one of the things that I know you did in the implementation phase was building relationships, not just with the elected officials, but with the staff people at the city who actually implement the law. And tell us a little bit about how you went about that and why it worked.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah, for passing a complete streets policy was probably the easiest thing we ever did. You know, it was simply bringing it to the city council, and no one can deny, you know, the need for us to make safer streets and build quality life in our neighborhoods. Like it was a very easy early win. But the challenge came in terms of getting the city to actually apply that policy on a consistent and regular basis. How do they apply it? Where do they apply it? What are the resources to do it? And then, of course, you know, who is responsible for implementing it? And you know, traffic engineers who have been trained to, you know, build our roadways in one way for generations are now being asked to do something differently. And so we early on took you know, my approach was, you know, we got the win from the policy side. We got the council, we got the mayor to sign it into law. The focus is really the public works department in the city of Buffalo. Spent a lot of time building relationships. I think the benefit, early benefit was, you know, I had played basketball with the city engineer in an evening league. And so, you know, we had a chance to, you know, talk about some of these things prior to him actually being in that position. You know, when we got the policy passed, some of the early pieces that we focused on was getting resources to bring some of our city traffic engineers down to New York City, out to Portland, Oregon, out to places that have been really showing how to make this work, and learning from their peers of how they're changing their policy, how they've not only adopted a policy, but changed their administrative guidelines of how they are doing this work, how are they measuring this work, what is the impact. And that was incredibly, you know, valuable for us. And it was, you know, not only was it giving them an opportunity to learn how other cities are accomplishing this work, but it was also, you know, really cementing those important relationships with them. You know, going out and having dinner and having beer over a course of a week. You know, talking about our kids. You know, it wasn't an adversarial relationship anymore. And, you know, I think our biggest win early on was the repaving of Delaware Avenue. You know, this was a simple project where the city was going to mill it, repave it, and put the paint down just the same way as it always had been. And our Public Works Commissioner at the time, Steve Stepniak, was our champion for that. He, you know, agreed with the efforts that we're trying to accomplish, and, you know, put his head and neck out there to make that project work. And we had built such a strong relationship with the Public Works Department that when they were getting pushback from a couple of businesses on Delaware Avenue, they called us and said, hey, I'm getting asked to pull this out and stop right now. We need your support. Can you guys get people to call the mayor's office? And so we flooded the mayor's phone number with hundreds of people calling and say, this makes complete sense. You know, we want bike lanes on Delaware Avenue. You know, fast forward a couple years later at the Congress for New Urbanism that came into the city, the mayor vindicated the Public Works Commissioner, because throughout that conference, you know, it was a highlight of some of the work that the city has been doing to reallocate the space in the streets to make it safer. And, you know, it's really easy for a city like Buffalo, where, you know, we were once twice the population, that our traffic volumes never met the amount of capacity that we built on our streets to even justify the widths that are there, which only, you know, encourage more speeding and unsafe roadways. And so just reallocating that space through paint, it wasn't even an increase of cost, except for a couple extra lines of paint on the street, made a significant difference. And so I can't express enough how important it is to really build those relationships. Now, that being said, we've had a change in leadership in the Public Works Department. Our current commissioner is not as supportive as the previous commissioner was, and isn't taking the leadership position. And so we've had to change our tactics now, and really kind of focus on some of the traffic safety concerns. And so there's one of the images, Kristen, that I have there is a heat map that really shows all the traffic crashes that are happening in the city. You know, take a look at where those crashes are occurring. They're happening on Bailey Avenue. They're happening in the West Side. They're happening downtown. You know, those red and blue dots are pedestrians and cyclists. And over the last 5 years, there's been over 1,800 people hit by a car and either injured or killed on our city's roadways. You know, it's not easy to get this information, but it really highlights the need for making our streets safe. You know, there was another person riding his bicycle on Bailey Avenue just this week that was struck and killed by a car. You know, this past Bike Ped Board meeting, George Johnson, who is founder of the East Side Bike Club, who's a member of the Bike Ped Board, basically asked the city of Buffalo, after we've already sent letters to the council and to the mayor saying, what is it going to take for us to get some basic improvements on Bailey Avenue? Another person being hit and killed. And lo and behold, another person's been hit and killed. Our consistent message to our city has been, paint their crosswalks, stripe some bike lanes, and provide some of the basic infrastructure amenities to make our roadways safe. We did this process on Niagara Street, but that street is going to be an amazing example of a complete street in the city of Buffalo. That took 10 years to the point now where it's under construction and not even completed. That process started back in 2010. And so, when we hear the mayor get out there and say, oh, we spent X amount of millions of dollars to add new sidewalks or to stripe bike lanes and crosswalks on the streets. You talk to the folks of the Public Works Department and they'll tell you it's going to take us the next 50 years to get to every single street in the city of Buffalo. And so it's really important to make sure that, it's not about how much money we're spending, because infrastructure costs a lot of money. But it's important to demonstrate through data and through community input where there's some significant safety concerns, and consistently being on top of them. Maintenance is not a sexy subject. It's not something you can do a ribbon cutting behind. It's one of those basic elements that we should be having on a regular basis in the city of Buffalo.
I love the way your story wove together all the tools that we're talking about: the base building, the telling the story, and the working with the elected officials and sometimes more importantly the non-elected officials, the staff, to make change. I want to encourage folks listening in to go ahead and ask questions, and encourage Kristen to voice those questions. While we do that, I want to turn and ask you all about some of your current top priorities now for systems change. What do you think? What are you working on that you are excited about, or that you think has potential for change, or next steps from the work we've been talking about, or totally new things? Starting with Lujean. Lujean, what's on the horizon?
Well, it's interesting you say horizon because there are lots of things on the horizon. And I just want to say, as relates to the waterfront, continuing to press for a park on the outer harbor to continue the progress of making one of our greatest public assets publicly valuable. But I would also like to say that, as regards to a theory of change, I don't know that this is a theory of change or not, but I would say, having done this kind of work for many, many, many decades, what matters is what is on the ground. What is the civic infrastructure, we might call it, how we are building one person at a time, a beloved community, because the power structures are still there. And we know that Buffalo still racially and socioeconomically is highly inequitable. The thing that is encouraging to me is that because we have this kind of an infrastructure, because the social sector has the support of some interesting philanthropic results that are building this slowly, this notion over time of a more democratic and equitable community. Now we can see sometimes change goes slowly, and sometimes when you have that infrastructure and something happens, change comes very quickly. I would just like to say that right now, change is coming quickly to America, and it's way late on many of the issues of racism and inequality that it's exposing, and that the COVID-19 is also exposing. But this is an opportunity to demand that our democracy lives up to its ideals. And so in very general terms, I think the kind of discussions that we've had here about specific projects, the idea that we have to hold our democracy, our elected officials accountable, and to take more power back for the people is what I would say. That's a broad agenda, Sam, and everybody. But look, this is a broad initiatives, many broad community initiatives that we've talked about today. And so I'm optimistic that we can address the considerable challenges that are right here in front of us, and really build the power and in a quicker way to live up to what this community can be.
Thanks, Eugene. India, I want to be sure that you tell people about the really exciting stuff that's coming up for the FB Community Land Trust and some of the progress that you're making in the plans, but also invite you to reflect more generally on the question of what next.
Sure. I am a mother. I'm a nurse. I am incredibly passionate and will remain emboldened to speak out on behalf of the people and those, you know, who I feel like need to be uplifted. We are in the process of breaking ground on 2 new bills in partnership with Habitat for Humanity over on Rose Street. We are in pre-development for a 50-unit multifamily project that includes a multi-unit and a mix of an infill in the Fruit Belt neighborhood. I think that we all need to be operating at the intersection of racial, economic, criminal, legal, housing, and healthcare justice. We cannot afford to any longer be single issue individuals or organizations. And I don't know if you could see that, but I think that most importantly right now is give us our money, right? Like trickle down is a theory that we have proven is not a strategy that is effective. Put the money on the ground where it matters. All of the issues that we face today that have been amplified by our national lens on police brutality, our national lens on healthcare that has been exposed through the COVID crisis has to do with poverty. If people are not poor and desperate, then they are also not sick and can't learn and committing crimes because they need to find food or shelter or make ends meet. So I think that there is a broader conversation and legislation and policy that needs to happen about like how resources are allocated, and I'll keep beating that drum. Give us our money. We know what to do with it. Like, we don't need the top wealthy to decide what's best for poor people. We know how to use money if it's available to us. So like, do that. Like, give us our money. We built this country. This country was founded on stolen land, stolen labor, and it continues to steal, exploit, and extract from workers and people of color and women. And we're tired of carrying it on our backs. So the best thing that can happen in this moment is to give us what rightfully belongs to us.
So I noticed in the chat, folks are interested in the question of budgets and participatory budgeting and municipal budgeting. We've got a workshop coming up exactly on that. Brian Bornkamp is going to be leading that. So look at the PPG events section on our website and sign up for the budgeting workshop so you can learn more about that and contribute more to that. Really exciting the progress that you've made in the Fruit Belt and the really dramatic development, community-controlled development underway there. India. Jessica, how about you? What are you working on right now? What's the biggest event on the horizon for you, or biggest campaign?
Yeah, so we're in a environment that we've never been in our lifetimes with the pandemic and school closures, and then all of the energy around addressing police brutality and institutional racism, which is having obviously huge impacts on our families as well. So I think we're trying to figure out, what does this look like? I mean, we're just wrapping up a school year and the past couple months that have been incredibly, incredibly difficult on our families. And again, lots of disconnects between the school district and our families and community. So I think what we're really trying to work on now is rebooting our parent and student community health worker program, trying to find allies that can help us. Families need a lot of support. I also think it's an opportunity for us to reclaim education of our children because there's been a lot of miseducation that has happened. You can see some folks that have had experiences that have been quite frustrating. So we really want to come together and create hubs. We're exploring a potential Freedom School project with some of our partners that might launch over the summer. So anyone that wants to get involved or sees a role, and it's everybody from parents and students to folks that can do research and help with policy and advocacy, provide any type of education and support. We've worked with all the different partners that are presenting today as well in a variety of different ways. Go Bike has done a Build a Bike program and all those hands-on experiential things. I think we're just trying to really re-envision what schools and education should be and how we can help our families be healthy, safe, and supported, and just think about how we do education in school differently.
Wonderful. Rawa, how about you? What's the biggest thing on the horizon for Push Buffalo right now?
Lots of things for Push Buffalo. For example, we're working on the National Green New Deal, which also includes a National Homes Guarantee. It's a really incredible policy. We're trying to also pass a National Homes Guarantee in New York State to expand on the evictions legislation that were passed last year. We are also working on the implementation to make sure that the CLCPA will be implemented in the way that it was designed, and that there are points of accountability structures during the review process for the Climate Action Council. We're also working on a new legislation. It's called the CCIA, or the Climate and Community Investment Act. It's a polluter fee, basically a tax on the folks that have created the climate crisis and all the pollution in our community and making them pay. It would generate something like $7 to $10 billion a year for New York State, and that is the way that we think we can pay for the implementation of CLCPA, which would put people to work, over 150,000 new jobs a year for a decade in the clean energy sector, as well as really looking at communities that would be impacted by closures of coal burning plants and so forth, making sure that there's a just transition for those workers to be transitioned off, or making sure that they're able to receive the full benefits they are currently. And then, of course, it's the actual building the infrastructure for the transition to clean energy economy, but making sure that people that look like us, that are oftentimes left behind, will also enjoy those benefits, as well as the 35% benefits that would be redirected to communities to rebuild those communities to healthy, thriving communities. At the local level, the most important thing for us is the passage of Carriol's Law, which would bring, it would make sure that police are being held accountable, and that folks would not be fired or penalized for doing the right thing and doing their actual job to serve and protect. It would also mean that Carriol Hone would get her pension reinstated. So that is a really big thing. And we're also very much committed to defunding the police. But of course, defunding the police does not mean take the police away, although I do believe in abolition personally. But what it means is that those services would actually be redirected. Buffalo is still the third poorest city in America. We need more affordable housing, supportive housing. And then Push Buffalo, of course, is building, we're getting ready to fill out our application for a 53-unit scattered site project that would be built to net zero and passive house standards, employing men and women from our hiring hall, and getting us much closer to the clean energy mandates of the CLCPA, with 16% of the units are being saved for supportive housing for people dealing with mental health, addiction, and chronic homelessness. And then one other thing I was going to say just overall is we have to do systems change work, and that is dismantling colonialism, consumer mindset, patriarchy, fossil fuel extraction. So how do we do that with our values? Maybe we let the people that haven't been leading, that actually have the solutions on the ground, to lead the way. People like India, Walton, and other women of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and women should be leading the way. And I think we just need as many opportunities for anybody here on this platform can help pave the way to allow us to do that, would be a game changer. Thank you.
Thank you, Rawa. Kristen, I want to make sure you get a chance to voice questions that you're hearing from the chat or that you have. While you get ready to do that, I just want to comment about something that you all have in common, is that you all are very good at attacking the bad and building the good at the same time. And Rawa, your remarks just then really illustrated that in terms of actually building the beloved community on the ground. People can walk around the West Side and they can see with their own eyes what a just, sustainable community looks like in your redevelopment zone. Similarly, Jessica, the kids can eat the good food. They can have recess. They can have physical education. They can participate in this. Justin, people can bike through the city. They can feel what it's like. India, people can walk through the fruit belt and start to see that the community is taking back its land and taking control of its land. So I just want to emphasize that blend that's so hard to achieve that you all have done in different ways. Kristen, over to you for any questions.
Yeah, Sam. And I think just this conversation has sparked a lot of excitement and a lot of interest from a lot of our registrants and our participants here today. So in general, many of them are asking, well, how can I get involved in things? Or more broadly, how are Buffalonians or leaders within our organizations or our communities inviting or organizing new folks? So maybe people moved here for jobs, maybe they don't have history here in Buffalo, but how do you get new people involved or active in your campaigns or initiatives who might not have the understanding or the history of the local neighborhoods?
So panelists, when you want to tackle that, so opportunities for people to plug in, and especially people who aren't from here, who moved here recently, to get involved in any of these efforts.
We welcome everyone. I have recently begun calling myself a cultural curator. I've been in Buffalo my entire life, and I feel very proud to know lots of people and interesting things about the place. So I would say to reach out. I don't think that the people who are active in this city are in hiding. You can clearly identify those who will show you around, introduce you to folks. Our community is very welcoming. We don't care where you're from, right? If you have the best interest of our community at heart, we'll find a way to plug you in. And we need all kinds of people, right? I think that this panel has proved that. We need big mouth activists. We need academics. We need doctors, nurses, moms, dads. They're just people. The more the merrier. So I put my email in the chat. Jessica's put her email in the chat. You can hit up the PPG website. There are always ways to plug in and interact with the people who are building the movement.
So Push Buffalo is a member-driven, member-led organization. So you can become a member. There's a whole host of ways to get involved in campaigns and other volunteer opportunities. You can also just come and take a tour of the Green Development Zone whenever we reopen after this whole COVID business.
Wonderful. Anyone else want to mention ways to get involved? If not,
yeah,
Justin.
I'd be happy to add. Go Bike has a lot of activities going on. I think one of the most valuable ways that we engage with the community is we've been doing what we call pop-up Complete Streets projects. So working with neighbors, residents, and volunteers to go out there and restripe crosswalks and stripe bump outs at intersections. Stripe bike lanes. We did a great project last year in the first ward in Lackawanna. We've worked with schools in the city of Niagara Falls. So there's lots of opportunities to actually roll up your sleeves, get your hands full of paint and help make some of those immediate changes happen on the streets. But we also have a call to action right now. The city, again, I mentioned the Bailey Avenue crash that occurred. We are asking people to reach out to the mayor, reach out to your council member, let them know that, waiting 10 years to fix Bailey Avenue is not successful. We need immediate changes right now. I chair the city's bike ped board, which just this past fall sent a letter to the mayor and to the council asking them to just paint a double yellow line down the middle of the street, because there were several businesses that had recently had cars crash into their business after Main Street improvements for their facades. And so we need this basic infrastructure on a street. So we need people to call our elected officials and engage in that way. And we want people to also start participating by getting out there, organizing your neighbors, and working with us to help move some of these projects forward in your neighborhoods.
Wonderful. One thing I really want to emphasize, one phone call to an elected official makes a big, big difference. A lot bigger than signing an online petition, for example. Buffalo is still a relatively small city, and every elected official counts their phone calls on an issue. They respond very directly to what they're hearing from people. So really urge people to use that tool. Call the elected official, You might not speak to them directly. You might just leave a message with the aide. It'll make a big difference. They really evaluate based on, did the person care about it enough that they phoned? So it's a big deal. Kristen, other questions you want to address before we wrap?
Yep, there's two quick ones and maybe not so quick. One is about funding. I think recently we saw that a lot of our funders and a lot of folks were able to mobilize huge amounts of resources in response to COVID-19. And in a sense, as a lot of our panelists have mentioned, this just sort of exacerbated the existing social determinants and inequities that already existed in our communities. So the question is around, how do you mobilize these resources and this funding just in our everyday inequities that we experience all the time? Is there a way to do that? And then the second one, completely unrelated, but also very important, is around voting. So there's been a lot of discourse around the important thing is to get people to get out and vote, which is important, but how do you encourage people to get involved in other ways? I think, Sam, you had mentioned one, calling someone, but are there other ways to encourage people to make a difference outside of just making their vote heard?
Okay, wonderful. So panelists, anyone want to take a crack at either one of those questions?
I always have something to say. So I'll answer Taylor's question first. And I think the answer to that is like, get in where you fit in, right? Like whatever you're good at, do that. And voting is critical, but also like creating art, building relationships with your neighbors is equally as important. And to the first question about funding, I want to just talk a little bit about some of the work that we've done in the Fruit Belt during COVID. We pivoted for a while to doing food distribution because that's what our people needed, right? Like we developed affordable housing, but our people were calling because they needed food. So we raised money to provide groceries for an amount of time, and there were lots of people who we served who called because they wanted to donate. So like, let's get away from this notion that we need big philanthropy or people to like give us things, right? Like we take care of ourselves. We've been doing it. So I mean, yes, like the charge is to funders to draw down power and money to the places where it matters the most, but also like know that we have power among ourselves and resources among ourselves to take care of one another also.
It is exactly noon, and it'd be hard to imagine better words to close on than what India just gave us. Kristen, any last words or announcements you want to make to our audience?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming, for participating. We'll be sharing all the resources that were shared in the chat, as well as the presenters' email addresses and links to some of the ways for you all to get involved, in addition to the action section on the PPG website. So I encourage you all to take a look at that email, to fill out your survey, and really to get involved. But thank you all to our panelists and to Sam for facilitating.
Thank you all.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.